thank you all for joining us today for our installment of the Fall Seminar Series, hosted by the Stavros Niarchos Foundation Center for Hellenic Studies at Simon Fraser University. Each year, we invite leading international scholars working on different aspects of Hellenic studies to present their research on a wide range of topics in the fields of archaeology, classics, Byzantium, Ottoman and modern Greek history, as well as literary and cultural studies. Before we begin, however, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that this event is taking place at Simon Fraser University on Burnaby Mountain, on the unceded traditional territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Coquitlam peoples. And before I introduce today's presenter, I'd like to remind everyone that this webinar is being recorded, and I'm very pleased to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Danai Thomaidis, who is the SNF Center for Hellenic Studies 2021-2022 Hellenisms Past and Present Local and Global Postdoctoral Fellow. She studied cultural heritage at Statale University of Milan and gained her MA in medieval and Byzantine art history at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. And for her PhD at the same university, she analyzed the introduction, cult, and exposition of Byzantine icons in churches, streets, and houses of Venice and of the Venetian-ruled colonies of the Mediterranean. Her research interests include the cult of Byzantine icons in the wider Mediterranean context, Marian devotion in Byzantium, a girl after my own heart, and the West, a religious transformation and social identity in the Middle Ages. She's received scholarships from the Leventis Foundation and Swiss universities and participated as a speaker in numerous international conferences. During her time at the SNF Center for Hellenic Studies, she'll be finalizing her book manuscript, The Life of Icons in Venice, as well as working on another project, Iconic Montages as Bearers of Meaning from Constantinople to Venice, 13th to 15th centuries, in which she will explore the techniques utilized for the exhibition of icons in Byzantium and Venice to understand how these visual assemblages created new meanings for the viewers. Her next two articles will be focused on icon worship amongst the Venetian working class and on the use of icons as media of self-expression and the promotion of Venice. And I have to say, I'm also very thankful that she's joined the Digital Mary team and been an important part of our team so far this semester. So without further ado, I hand off the presentation to Danai.
Thank you. So hello everyone. I will begin with the presentations. If there are any problems, you let me know. And so let me take the mask off. Okay. So in this presentation, I will focus on the role of icons as self-expression media, focusing on the Western territory of Venice. And from Byzantium to Venice, icons, like other artifacts, were vehicles of meaning, so carriers of memory, helping individuals to circumscribe their sense of the self. They helped underline personal characteristics and attributes of an individual's assumed social roles. Icons could cover a wide range of significance, from devotion to intellectual baggage, military achievements, and social position and/or aspiration. By displaying an icon, an individual was at the same time expressing its personal self, as well as its social and intellectual milieu. Icons could also shape people's lives by creating relationships or by changing hand due, for example, to donations. In this context, it is useful to think of the icon as a living entity, as the sociologist Durai would put it. An icon had a life in the sense that it could interact with its owners, like a person, shape their experience, and vice versa. So I will try to limit as much as possible the references to famous public icons, since in these cases the use of the medium is usually strictly political, and I will concentrate instead on those icons that were mostly kept in the house interiors and with which the members of the family developed a more intimate relationship. So the methodology is that of the research of clues that can indicate the purposes for which the icons were used. I make a very brief introduction on the Byzantine context, and then I move on to the Venetian one, where a massive introduction of icons is attested starting from the 15th century. The clues to which I focus are those of archaeological indexes, icon biographies, and assemblages of icons and other pictorial genres. The period of focus is from the 13th to the 16th century, even if the majority of the practices we'll see are in use still today among the Orthodox populations and not only. So regarding archaeological indexes, the addition of decorative elements to adorn the icons can illustrate the intimate bond between the owner and his or her icon. The use of ornament is as late as the invention of icons itself. We can read already in the 2nd century Apocryphon of John of his disciple Thomaidis, who had commissioned an icon of the apostle, and he had hung it in his bedroom and honored it with flowers, and candles, a custom still present again in the spaces where icon worship is still practiced. The close relationship icon owner is clearly attested by an epigram on a manuscript now kept in the Marciana Library of Venice. In it, we read that during the 12th century, the Constantinopolitan John Dalasinos employed the jewelry of his deceased wife Maria to adorn an icon of the Virgin, not only as an expression of his devotion, but also, as he informs us, in the hope that the Theotokos would intercede at the time of the Last Judgment for his and his wife's salvation. So under this lens, it is possible to imagine that the use of his wife's jewelry had a specific aim. John certainly had other ornaments he could have used for adorning the icon. The use of his wife's jewelry was probably a way to make her participant as well in this act of request for a better fate of their souls during the Last Judgment. Through her ornaments, Maria, the wife, became also present and participant in the request for help, at the same time giving more strength to such dual prayer. The custom of using feminine jewels to adorn the Virgin and the icons of the Virgin was certainly not a unique case in Byzantine context, as we can also see from the text of the miracles of St. Eugenius and many other sources as well. So in a similar fashion, after their arrival in Venice, icons continued to be decorated with precious ornaments in order to highlight their special status. In fact, not all icons were considered worthy of being decorated with such precious jewels, but only those that, due to their biography, had already shown a thaumaturgical nature. Among these icons in Venice, we can in fact count, for example, the icons of the Nicopoeia, which was an imperial icon, and legend has it that was helping the military towards their enemies in battles. The Orthocosta, which was a miraculous icon that was miraculously transported, or even the Madonna della Pace, which according to the legend had gave back to John Damaskinos his head that was cut by the Byzantine emperor. In all these cases, the ornaments serve to highlight the thaumaturgical nature of these images. Another indicator of the icon owner relation is the presence of inscriptions. These are very important markers of self-expression, since they gave the patron the opportunity to construct and project his or her identity with actual words. So in such cases, we often see the will of the owner to remark his lineage and social position. As an example, we can cite an embroidered icon veil from Sofia. The veil was donated by Progonos Gouros and his wife Evdokia to the foundation of the monastery of the Virgin Periglatus in Ohrid, along with other items. The dimensions, as well as the iconography of the cloth, suggest that the piece was originally served as a podia, a sort of cover, attached to a particularly venerated private icon with a depiction of a Christ. Anyhow, the inscription gave the occasion to remark the status of Zouros, so because he describes himself as illustrious Megas and so on, and of the wife of Evdokia as well, who is commonly through maternal and paternal lineage, and so ask for the pardon of their sins. Now, regarding the use of icons and description to promote the proper lineage, it is also interesting to see the example of another podium that is now exposed in the Museum of Urbino in Italy. In the description, we see the owner, a certain Manuel, giving a precise description of his lineage. It says, I, your servant Manuel, son of the illustrious, thrice blessed Belchio, whose father was a Caesar, whose mother was a purple blossom branch, and so on. So the description of the high lineage is followed by the request for protection, claiming that since my mother's womb, I have been entrusted to you. So he points his noble origins as well as the family devotion and dedication to the worship of the archangel. And we can understand how strong the will of self-projection was in these cases if we make a comparison, for example, between such epigrams and those of other social realms of the time, for example, the monastic one, when in this case, we don't find often a reference to family backgrounds, which is probably a reflection of the monastic ideal of the renunciation of the world and along with it of all worldly affiliations. Once more, these sort of self-projection tools were appropriated by Venetian and the Western world in general, but with a minor intensity if compared, for example, with the use of decorating icons with precious ornaments, as we saw before. So in Venice, the cases are rare in which the inscription goes beyond the common meter 31. Anyhow, when we find such inscriptions, they still denote the will of the owner to talk about him or herself, as in the case of this little icon donated by a certain Mariano at the Church of the Convent of the Redentore in the Giudecca island of Venice. So the 17th century inscription begins with the presentation of the donor, io, which means I, then moving on, asserting that he is donating the miraculous icon to the monastery as a manifestation of his particular devotion, per mia particolare devozione. So the donor highlights his fervent devotion as the reason for which he decided to donate the icon. Now, moving on, as I said in the beginning of the talk, archaeological indexes are not the only indicators of the significance of that an icon could have for its owner. Other clues can come from the biographies of the icons through the study of archives and sources. In this respect, inventories and wills are of extreme significance since they can permit us to have a quick glimpse on the personal view of the owner. For example, from the 14th century will of Theodoros Saradinos from Beria, we learn that he was in possession of a variety of icons, but of all his icons, he indicates the provenience of just one, and that was from Constantinople. So according to the will, he obtained the icon during a stay in the Byzantine capital. He explicitly mentions the origin, probably in order to highlight its connection with what must have been the most important as well as prestigious period in his life, underlining the prestige of having lived in the capital and having been associated with the empire's highest social circles. This again will be an extremely popular practice in the West as well, where the majority of the icons were presented as Constantinopolitan or at least of some Byzantine territory. But while for Saradinos the relation with the icon was more that of a personal achievement, in the Venetian context it was mostly a power statement. So as the Patriarch Giovanni Tiepolo had expressed it in his treaty, the icons, like the power, were leaving Constantinople and moving to Venice, the actual heir of the Christian empire, of the Christian Byzantine Empire. A prominent part of the biography of an object is also represented by its movement from one place to another. Its character in different cultural, cultic, and political contexts denote its role in relation to the society in which it operates. From this point of view, it is particularly interesting to note the management of the first icons that were introduced in Venice, mainly from the Eastern Venetian colonies, by noble Venetian patricians. icons became, in fact, a very strong tool in affirming the social position of the patrician class. We have to remember here that during the 15th century, there was the seconda serrata, which is a term that designates a progressive tightening of the necessary measures to entry for the entry of young patricians to the Maggior Concilio, the Great Council of Venice, which was the most powerful political organ of the city. So one of the prerequisites for accessing the Maggior Concilio was that the family resided in Venice and that the father was already a member. As the standards for joining the Maggior Concilio narrowed, the impediments increased for the Venetians and mostly for those that were living in the Venetian colonies of the Mediterranean, who could not fulfill the requirement of having a permanent residence in Venice and probably didn't have a father in the Great Council since they were living outside the strictly Venetian territory. So the entry to the Patriarchate was in fact part of a very complex network of relationship, of friendships and kinship to which the Venetians living in the Mediterranean colonies, due to their different origin and residence, could not have access. Therefore, upon their return in the Serenissima in Venice, these families had to face a hostile environment which denied them the recognition of their rank. Their reception and integration into Venetian society was hindered by the sense of superiority of the indigenous nobility, which perceived themselves as more prestigious than the nobles of the colonies. So in such a social environment, the possession of icons assumed a political and identity significance for patrician families, and especially from those from the Levantine colonies, who felt the need for social recognition and more strongly in the context of the motherland. So the great majority of the first Byzantine icons to enter Venetian churches were in fact donations of such patrician families who gave their Byzantine icons that had brought from Crete, and at the same time very often promoted general requalifications of the buildings that were supposed to house these icons. One of the first examples of such actions is, for example, the donation of the icon of the Virgin della Passione, brought from Crete by the General Andrea Pisano and immediately donated to his parish church of San Fantine, together with a big requalification program for the entire building. And in fact, the Venetian historian Francesco Sansovino, a century later, so still a century later after Pisani's donation, wrote that the Church of San Fantine was nobilitated thanks to the icon brought by the Pisani. So by donating icons to the public realm, the patrician family had a strong tool for their social reaffirmation. And that we can see in many texts. I mean, Sansovino is not the only one. In every text, these families are always remembered as the ones who donated and nobilitated the city with their donations. So far regarding the male members of the Patriziato, but now what about the women? So in Venice, as well as in Florence and many other cities, noble women, all women, were forbidden to enter most civic buildings, and so the female sphere was mostly confined in the house interior. The only way for a woman to gain, establish, and exhibit their status was their action in the domestic sphere, which was mainly relegated to the management of the sacred matter. Women's main responsibility was the reading of the sacred scriptures and the care of the domestic icons and altars that they had to use also for educating their children with the Christian moral values, emulating the example of the Virgin Mary taking care of young Christ. The preoccupation of the male sphere regarding human attitude at the house is clearly expressed by the consistent production of books that were supposed to serve as guides for human behavior. So according to Paolo da Ghertaldo, for example, a secular writer, women should, like the Virgin, stay indoors in a hidden and honest place. He encouraged his readers to have the woman follow the example of the Virgin Mary, who was the first and most excellent virgin virginity, And to follow the Virgin's model, young women should stay enclosed, locked up in a hidden and honest place, so that they could be acceptable to God and to their husband and to other persons. And still a century later, Bernardino da Siena recommended that his female listeners learn to stay at home, following the example of the Virgin Mary. So the everyday life of the woman was that to stay at home, taking care of the house and its sacred matter, and if she was a mother, also of her children as well, following the example of the Virgin. In such everyday routine, the management of domestic icons assumed an important role, as Giovanni Dominici informs us. They were indispensable for the good education of the children. But in addition to being in charge of adorning the domestic icons and altars or educating the children, women could also take actions that gave them social visibility while remaining in the home. One of those were the acts of charity and donation of icons to charitable institutions, churches, or to their humble maids. Through the management of sacred effigies, females had a rare opportunity to gain, or even just to exceed, their status and their values in the outer world, while at the same time assuring the good fate of their soul after death. So thanks to the study of the significant number of wills of Venetian noblewomen, we know that it was a widespread custom to donate Byzantine icons to the female servants of the house as an act of Christian charity. We also have to remember here that the will was one of the few, if not the only, tool for managing a female's property, which was otherwise under the control of her father or husband. The reading of the final will took place in the open air and became a matter of public record. Female testators were trying to influence their circumstances through their wills as public acts, which defined the woman's power and influence in society. So we have here to consider at least 4 socio-political factors that determine the act of donation of Byzantine icons to the poor maids. The first was the medieval perception of women as emblems of Catholic morality and as individuals that had an advantageous relation with the sacred. Their role in commemorating the deceased through their prayers became central in the economic salvation of the city, and they were sometimes asked to perform prayers in front of sacred images in order to assist the dead's soul. So the donation of the icon to a female servant was most likely done also in order to obtain a prayer by the maid and as a consequence benefit the noblewoman's soul, as is clearly indicated by the frequent indication in the wills of pro anima mia, per la mia anima, and so on, which means in order to benefit my soul. So they say, I leave this icon to my servant in order to benefit my soul. Furthermore, for a more universal anthropological perspective, we can consider such action through Mauss's gift theory. Gift giving in archaic societies accompanied a variety of social interactions of contractual nature, a giving-receiving nature. These were due to the assumption that part of the owner's soul resided in the gift given, exerting a sort of magic hold over the recipient until it was replaced by an item of equivalent value. So in this case, the icon in exchange of the prayer. Gift is credit, gift exchange ties different social groups and promotes solidarity as the sacred offering establishes communication with God. So it's a basic, archaic and ubiquitous form of social interaction. Mauss's idea is that the gifts have to be returned with interests. And again, here the gift of the icon has to be returned by the prayer of the maid. And moreover, while the exchange was in general a male social action, when it came to domestic icons, it passed in the female sphere, also affirming a female independence count field. A second central concept is that icon donation could also ensure remembrance. to be prayed for, one had to be remembered, and donating the icon cemented such redemptive commemoration. In fact, as we see, for example, in the will of Lucia Zorzi, she affirms to donate her image to her servant so that she could look after her as she has done until now. That's what she says to the will. So the presence of the icon in the servant's house was supposed to remember her the cues she had given to her noblewoman while she was alive and to continue to do so after her death. Now, a third motive for noblewomen to donate their icons to their maids had to do with the almost sacred status that poor people were beginning to acquire, mainly from the 16th century onwards. Such conception is evident, for example, in a document issued by the Great Council of Venice in 1503, where we read that the chief and most salutary means of obtaining divine favor is to help the poor, in whom the person of our Lord Jesus Christ is represented. So in a public document, we can find a natural comparison between Christ himself and the poor individuals of the city. Finally, a significant reason to donate icons was the renewed and reinforced perception of Christian charity as one of the highest Christian values. So caritas in medieval and Renaissance theology was a complex term designing the love of God and the love of neighbor through compassionate and good acts of service to others. The established presence of guilds and confraternities that promoted charitable events, as well as the general climate of the pre- and post-Reformation period, continuously underlined the centrality of charity that the upper classes had to undertake for the Christian economy of salvation. As early as in 1516, in his De Officio Episcopi, the Venetian patrician Gasparo Contarini pointedly placed concern with the plight of the local poor at the top of his list of moral duties. And again, in 1529, the Senate issued a decree on which we read that charity is the most important form of good work. So, and in this same decades, when all this is happening, charity acts for the poor also began to appear with increasing frequency in a number of depictions in the altars, chapels, and refectories of the city's churches. Among others, we can here remember Titian's San John, Bonifacio de Pitatis Madonna of the Tailors, and Lorenzo Lotto, Sant'Antonino giving alms, all of which were placed in churches or confraternities of Venice. We can see that all these representations follow a precise pattern. We have the sacred figure placed on the upper half of the figuration, which does an act of charity to the poor people represented in the bottom of the picture. Since most of these paintings were commissioned for public view and were placed in the city's churches, there is no doubt that the devotees could see them in a daily basis, and as a consequence probably try to reproduce the same scheme in their personal space and life through putting themselves in the place of the sacred figures. Furthermore, as we can see, for example, in Lotto's painting, as well as in the official decrees of the Republic, the act of giving was perceived as heavenly inspired. So, with just one action, a triple advantage could be achieved by the noblewoman through the act of donating her icons to her servant. She could have a better faith of the soul through the maid's prayer, and she could have status acquisition through the act of charity in itself and the public reading of the will. And we could also have the imitation of the sacred figures and obedience to the religious models of the period. And if on one hand we see this sort of charity as a way to benefit after death, on the other hand, it was also a way to expose the hierarchy of Venetian society. By the sole act of donating, the lady affirmed her social position and class belonging. So until now, I have presented cases in which the clues came from biographies, from the biographies of icons. But furthermore, we also have examples in which similar goals could be achieved not by donating, not by donation, but by icon display and assemblages with other paintings. In fact, the intellectual of the period, Silvio Antoniano, had written that icons should be displayed not confusedly, but in specific places, and they should be arranged in good series order. Having secret effigies was not enough. In order to really benefit from them, their exposition was a crucial aspect. So leaving the female sphere behind, it is interesting to take a closer look at the 16th century inventory of a Venetian miniaturist called Gasparo Segizzi. In his reception area, the portico of the house, he had hung 9 paintings, 2 with the Virgin, the portraits of Gaspar himself and his deceased brother Venicio, painting with the effigy of an ancient emperor and the representation of Roman charity, plus with female figures, which we don't know exactly what they represented. So we have to keep in mind that the portico was a liminal sort of semi-public area of the house, and the paintings displayed there were meant to be seen by the visitors. This was the area where the owners could organize buffets and feasts to celebrate with friends, or where they could receive their more official visitors. But unfortunately, none of the artworks mentioned by Segizzi's inventory can be actually identified today. But of course, we can imagine how they look like. So we can imagine the ancient golden virgin as one of the many Greek icons of the city. The portraits in the style of contemporary Venetian portraiture, so more naturalistic. And the Roman charity as the usual representation of the young woman breasting her father. But what I believe is that we should read all this as a unique visual ensemble. Every depiction is connected to the other in the creation of sense. The icons of the Virgin give an extra semantic layer of charitable, moral Christian sense to the entire assemblage. The portrait of Segizzi himself points the centrality of his figure, who, together with his brother, have the qualities of the illustrious antique emperors, but also the Christian charity, which we have to remember is inspired by the celestial realm, which is here represented by the Greek icon. And it is also interesting to know how the combination of these representations could recreate images like those of contemporary painters seen previously. In these works, the figure who performs the act of charity is usually represented in an iconic, stylized way. Not only who represents charity, of course, in other depictions, in any case, the divine spirit is more often represented in an iconic way. While the intermediaries and the poor are rendered in a much more naturalistic manner. In such sets as Segizzi's, the scheme reproposes in a way the stylized Virgin or Saint, juxtaposed with a certainly more naturalistic representations of the portraits. Also, we have to keep in mind that the substitution of the iconic figure of the Virgin with actual icons was a widespread practice in the Venetian and not only context. As a consequence, it comes naturally to repropose the same iconographical scheme in the house interior with the family icon together with the other expressions of the material culture of the period, such as, for example, the portraits. And the case of Segizzi's iconic montage is not an isolated one. Among others, in the inventory of the wealthy nobleman Giovanni Simone Danai in the end of the 16th century, we find portraits of his relatives directly after a couple of religious paintings, among which 2 virgins. Or another example is that of a painter called Leonardo Albrizzi, who once more kept his portrait next to an icon of the Virgin Mary. So in all these cases, the beholders viewed the portraits in relation to the sacred images that also adorned the walls. As Margaret Morse has pointed out, when paired with a religious painting or other Christian symbol, the portrait could become a model of virtue and the devout self. And remember a reminder to pray for the departed family members, and the means to secure the fate of souls. So hanging portraits with or near religious images and goods also clearly announce the pious and moral nature of the family to all visitors of the home. Proximate display of portraits, effigies, and other representations with icons likely persuaded the viewer to create, consciously or unconsciously, visual and mental relationships between the different picture types. Now, the combination of icons with other pictorial genres could also be used to express the intellectual world of the owner. An interesting example is that of the assemblage of icons with maps and landscape paintings. As the scholar Genevieve Clarkson has noted, in the Venetian house, landscape paintings and maps were frequently coupled with religious images, most commonly of the Virgin Mary, and were mostly placed again in the representational space of the portico. So according to Carlton, such intentional pairings highlighted a family's devotion to religion as well as to a particular geographical place. And this is certainly true mostly regarding the icon map pairing, but combination as these could also work as markers of the intellectual milieu of the owner. For example, once more the miniaturist Segizzi, in another room, a reception room of his house, had paired pictures of an ancient Madonna, a nude woman, and depictions of the Roman emperors Augustus and Hadrian with an image of an old map, possibly of the classical world. The context of the room speak to Segizzi's interest to the classical past, and the map could amplify this impression, since it could demonstrate that the owner was a cultured, cosmopolitan, educated, but also moral man. This can be read not only as a form of self-fashioning, but also as a means of bolstering his career. Segizzi could benefit from impressing his patrons with his well-versed knowledge of the classics, paired of course with the most important value, that is that of the good Christian devotee. Now moving on to another example, in the corridor of Alvise da Ponte's house, we find the painting of Our Lady in the Greek manner and two little landscape panels, while again in the portico of the Zon family, together with an icon of the Virgin and Child, we find a painting of the Last Supper and one that represented naked figures in the water of the Flemish school. The very location of the painting, once more in the liminal area of the portico, suggests one more the owner's desire to expose them to the almost public view. The presence of the two little landscape panels in Da Ponte's house in proximity to the religious paintings could also allow to illustrate that the religious virtues of the owners could be combined with experiences of worldly and mundane life without compromising the qualities of the person. In fact, it has been shown that starting from the 16th century, themes related to life in the open air, in rural and harmonious landscapes, have become very popular in Venetian poetry. In authors of the time, we find essential poetry, where the landscape was conceived as a pastoral place where emotions were highly emphasized. The garden could also be the place for the erudite conversations of the humanists, as they are presented in numerous stories, poems, and novels, among which it's enough to recall Boccaccio, an author that was very much involved in the period in question, or the Asolani by Bembo. So the intimacy of the beautiful garden away from the city was in fact a well-established tradition in the Serenissima in Venice. During the time spent in the open air, Venetians used to discuss intellectual matters with their companions and with artists and scholars whom they patronized. The cultivation of nature and the cultivation of virtue met in the space of the garden of the landscape. Bucolic fashion, with its humanistic background, was similarly reflected in pictorial works. Landscape glimpses were gradually introduced in numerous paintings of religious subjects, such as the Madonnas by Bellini or by Cima da Conegliano, where they served as a background to the sacred figures and offered spaces for mental and visual pilgrimage. In Bellini's painting, the landscape, sometimes inhabited by figures, appeared primarily in religious paintings intended for private devotion before taking its place in the public altarpieces. In these works, the landscape probably assumed a meaning similar to that of the religious subject, becoming the physical manifestation of the divine presence in nature. The final intention was that to create an intimate and personal interaction aimed at stimulating the emotional response of the sophisticated and erotic public. The religious vision of the period, in fact, perceived the nature of the cosmos as an image of God himself, just as a painting was the image of the model to which it referred. The world reflected the perfection of its creator and the heavenly paradise. Arcadian poetry, the introduction of landscape painting by Flemish painters working in Venice, and its integration into devotional paintings brought the bucolic imagery into fashion and created a clear dialogue between this genre and icons. Through this integration, the Venetian public got used to the juxtaposition of sacred subjects and landscapes, even outside of the same painting. Arcadic fashion could also refer to themes of contemplation and moral significance, as we can see, for example, in this painting by Vercino, painted immediately after his voyage in Venice, where in fact this sort of moralizing allegories were quite popular. An effective exploration of the memento mori is here attained by the addition of the skull and the inscription on the lower part under the skull, et in Arcadia ego. So again, the landscape subject coincides with the profound contemplation of life and mostly death under the umbrella of Christian meditation. Finally, the elements of nature could also assist the private immersion into the meditative prayer of the beholder. Beginning from the 15th century, many devotional texts were in fact printed that made clear the central role of nature for the personal meditation. For example, during the 15th century, the text of the Vita Gloriosissime Matris Anne gained a certain fame. So the text narrates the story of the Virgin's grandmother, Emerantia, and according to the text, Emerantia, accompanied by Carmelite monks, prayed for advice regarding her marriage. After 3 days, she and her companions all had the same vision: a tree with a beautiful flower on one of his branches, and on that flower a succulent fruit. And the voice in the vision explained the meaning. So the tree was the marriage of Emeralda, the branch was Anne, the flower was the Virgin, and the fruit was Christ. And once more, the nature is a sort of allegory of the sacred genealogy, and as a consequence, it acquired a clear religious character. Furthermore, the concept of spiritual garden was a common topos, and we have already seen the Antoniano that advised the use of icons in good series in order to create giardini spirituali and spiritual gardens that are a support for the soul. So after all this, let's try now to imagine how these assemblages we just cited must have looked and what messages they could transmit. So the icon, perceived as carrier of a sacred matter, moralized the entire composition without eliminating the elements of the logician that could at the same time be transmitted by landscape paintings with their humanistic baggage. Landscape paintings alone would denote a different character of the owner, while the combination with the icon could change the entire composition. So in conclusion, if each object to some extent is used in a direct correspondence to the needs and purposes of the owner, the nature of the icons puts them in a sort of separate category. Their perception as objects impregnated with sacred matter, attributed to the icons of their devotion and power of their own, capable of conferring on those who had not only better religious conduct, but also social prestige and intellectual value. In order to be able to grasp the various functions that these objects had carried out in the different geographical and cultural contexts in which they found themselves, it is essential to try to grasp as much as possible the nature of the context and the relationship between the icons and the rest of the material culture that was available at the time and place in question. So if for the Byzantine period, one of the major material interlocutors for icon was, for example, the fresco decoration of the churches, for the context of the medieval and Renaissance Venice, it is essential to take into consideration the dialogue between icons and the pictorial genres that circulated. So religious paintings, landscapes, and portraits are some of the genres that, through the continuous dialogue with icons, created new visual codes, which in turn gave the icons new meanings and consequently provoked renewed methods of use. Even today, in contexts such as those of Greece or Russia or other Orthodox populations, the icon continues to be used as an instrument of personal pity, power, and assistance. Thank you, I'm done.